Welcome to our Everyday Heroes session here in March 2025. We have Anita Miner with us here from beautiful Salt Lake City. Let's begin in prayer. Lord God, living and true, you are our love, our wisdom, our humility, our endurance. You are our rest and our peace. You are our joy and gladness. You are our justice and moderation. In turn, we are your beauty made visible. We are your gentleness. We are your protector of the powerless, and we are your courage here on earth. Today we have with us Anita Miner. She's been a tertiary since 1982, and her path as a Franciscan has been to work as an advocate for the poor and the voiceless. And we look forward to hearing about that today. And welcome, Anita. It's great to see you.
Thank you very much, Gordon.
And our first question is, how did you become a Franciscan? What motivated you onto this path of what are we called? Somehow we are fools for God, right? I like
Um,
that one. So how did you choose that path?
well, I had no idea that there were Franciscans in the Episcopal Church until my husband, David Catron, came home one day from the University of Pennsylvania where he taught and said, "Oh, I'm going to become a Franciscan." And I said, "What's that?"
Right? Yeah.
So he had wandered into St. Mary's Chapel on the campus of the University of Pennsylvania in the 70s, late 70s. And he met John Scott, who was the first guardian of the Third Order Society of St. Francis. And they became friends and they talked about the Third Order. So there were meetings, mostly in Philadelphia, and some of the people who belong to that fellowship are still around, like Bill Graham.
Wow.
And
That's kind
yeah,
of neat because when my wife and I were first married, we lived just outside of Philadelphia.
ah,
And it's a great area there. Wonderful area.
absolutely. So another person who was a part of the fellowship was Peter Funk
Okay.
and his wife Mary and John, of course, and there were some others who had long gone, passed away. So I began going to the meetings, but I didn't make any promises because, whoa, what's
Yeah.
that? And Mary Funk was the same way. We just listened and learned and, absorbed as much as we could. And then David and I went to Mexico City. He had a job there. So at that point, having had about 2 years worth of Franciscan meetings and having done some readings, I found myself with a call. So I got a spiritual director who
Now, what do you
was,
mean you had a call? What do you mean by that?
well,
What
a
exactly
call,
happened?
a call to something deeper than just going to church.
But what in particular? Like, there's different that was there a particular event or emotional feeling or I don't know. You just had a vision. I don't know. Whatever. Something. What went click inside you?
It struck a chord with me that maybe this is one of my life's avenues that I needed to investigate this.
Right. Okay.
So I found a spiritual director who was a priest,
Right.
and later he was a bishop. This is in Mexico City. And we had a good relationship, and he did all those things that a spiritual director does. Signed me, well, let's say, suggested readings. And I remember he suggested that I read about Dietrich Bonhoeffer. I had
Ah,
not read Bonhoeffer before, but I did. And, the relationship grew. And because this was in the 70s and the internet was not really developed for individuals, it was for organizations and scientific endeavors, but not for people like me or you or anyone
uh,
else.
yeah.
So we got permission for David to be my counselor, which was unusual, but it cut off the mail, which would have taken a long time.
Hmm.
Send a letter from Mexico to the US and somebody gets it 2 weeks later, the person answers, takes another 2 weeks, and the mail just wasn't consistent or reliable. So he was my counselor and he did a fabulous job, I think,
Well,
even though we were married. So I continued. I
I'm just
became,
curious, when he became a Franciscan first, your husband, did it change him in any way? Did you notice any way he was different because of it?
well, absolutely.
Yeah.
He had a more spiritual bent to him. He internalized the rule, the guidelines, the 9 points, and yes, it did.
Right. Yeah, that's great. So it's not just here, you become a different person.
Yes, actions and words.
Yeah.
So, and he wasn't afraid to tell others about the third order.
Right.
I was a little shy about that because, again, I thought it was a Catholic thing. And who knew about religious orders?
Yeah.
They were quiet. And
Yeah.
that's how the third order was in
Yeah.
those days.
Yeah.
So we came back to the US after 3 years, and I think we lived in Florida. We had just moved to Florida. And we were invited by D. Dobson, who was the guardian or the Minister Provincial of the Americas in those days, to be a representative at the Roman Catholic Congress, it was, in Assisi. So that
Wow.
was the first time that we had gone to Assisi. So David was a representative, I was a representative, D. Dobson, John Scott, and an Englishman by the name of Richard Scott.
Mhm.
So we got there and we participated. We were recognized as the Anglicans. In fact, there's a funny story. The Roman Catholic secular Franciscan order had just changed their rule of life. And their rule of life is consistent. It doesn't have variations like ours. They don't custom make it.
Right.
It's one set rule. So they didn't have a copy of, of the rule in hand and they referred to it, but we had a copy. We had a copy in our hands and they said later, I Anglicani hanno la regola. So the Anglicans have the rule in hand. So that was pretty exciting to be recognized like that.
Right. Yeah.
So,
Now, did you
uh,
feel as Franciscan as the Catholic Franciscans?
well, that would be hard to say.
Yeah.
In my Episcopal upbringing, yes.
Yeah.
But, Roman Catholics are just as faithful
Yeah.
as all of the other ecumenical Franciscans. They internalize it in their way, according to their churches and their counselors and their spiritual directors. So, Yes,
Mm.
it's just carried out,
Mhm.
I'd say, slightly
Now,
differently.
did being in Assisi have some sort of impact on you in terms of
Oh my
the
gosh.
reality of this thing?
Oh, it was amazing to see where Francis would have walked,
Right.
walking the ground where Francis had walked, seeing the buildings that he went to, going to the cave, going to, um, well, every place. It was just an amazing adventure and made it much more real for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this was early in my profession. So, I really had a lot of advantages.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So you're on the journey now. It's now reality. You're seeing changes in your husband, so probably changes happening in you too. Harder to notice in yourself, but there. And you had to. We all have sort of a path within the order, right? There's a one thing that we choose. So what was your path, your unique path within the order that you chose to express your faith?
Well, it's always been through church, so I was willing to tell others about the third order.
Mhm.
Once I got over my shyness about it, because really, in those days, nobody talked about religious orders because there was a perception that these folks were well, somehow cloistered. They were in a convent or they were in a friary, and hardly
Mhm.
anyone knew there was a secular aspect to it.
Right, right.
Although with Anglicans, of course, we have not
Mhm.
only lay people, but deacons
Mhm.
and bishops.
Mhm. Now,
So,
in the directory, we all have a little description about ourselves that we chose. My focus happens to be on creation care. That's sort of
boy,
my
well,
point of emphasis. It says here, you talk about rescue and advocacy for the poor and the voiceless. How how has that been part of your path, your journey?
well, two ways. One, I'm a deacon in the Episcopal Church. I've been a deacon for 13 years. And I have ministries not only with the church, but with Third Order. And one of them is expressed as advocacy for those who don't have a voice. For instance, during the legislative session in Utah, in Salt Lake City, several of us, not only Anglicans, but Methodists and Lutherans, and some of no faith, go up to the Capitol and meet the legislators and try to educate them on what people in poverty or the underserved or the voiceless need, because there's no one who speaks up for them.
Mhm.
And legislators have so much going on. They sometimes have 500 bills before them, and they can't possibly know every angle of every bill. So
Yep.
we help
Mhm.
in that respect, and we try to humanize it. I
Mhm.
mean, the people we serve are not out in the hinterlands. They are people who live in the cities, they live in the counties. They are suffering, and we do such things as advocate against homelessness or against the food tax. In Utah, we have a food tax, which really impacts people
Hmm.
of low
That
income.
is very odd. I've never, even in Canada, we have what's called an HST, which is like a consumer tax on everything, but not food, because
Yeah,
it's considered a necessity, so you don't tax necessities, right?
right. Well,
Huh.
we have a very conservative state here, so
Yeah.
they do some things which many of us oppose. So
Right.
those are some of the issues that we try to help with. shelters, forming shelters, and we work with agencies. We work with other nonprofit organizations. And one of the groups that I belong to is called Crossroads Urban Center. And
Mhm.
there's a director there who puts us in touch with what the legislative bills are about and the needs of people in the city.
Now, when I was there for 5, 6 days this summer, because I mentioned before I have a good friend who lives there. And I got the sense, compared to other American cities that I've been in, that the homeless underclass situation is not near as bad as anywhere else. I mean, it's like Philadelphia is 100 times worse, you know?
Well, large, really large cities,
Yeah.
obviously, like Philly or San Francisco, but they in Salt Lake City, they try to push the homeless out to the mountains or out of view.
Mhm.
So it's clearly there.
Okay. All right.
And I wanted to say that another aspect of my ministry is I'm a junior league member. This is a group of people who are trained volunteers. I don't know if you have them in Canada or not,
Mm.
but one of the things I do, because I know some languages, international languages, is I help out at a medical and dental screening event. It's a 2-day event for low-income families or those who don't have health insurance. And I do interpreting for those who
Mm.
can't speak
You speak
English.
Spanish then?
I do.
Yeah.
I have
Cool.
a master's in Spanish.
Wow. Wow. So that's been your journey. Have you been involved in, the third order, like, as a chaplain or whatever, or in chapter, that kind of a thing?
Well, I was Minister Provincial for 6 years.
Oh, wow. Holy cow. Well, I was directed to say, you need to talk to Anita, but I didn't know that. All right.
And before that, I was Fellowship Coordinator, which is now called Fellowship Guardian.
Yeah, yeah,
And,
yeah.
lots of things. About the only thing I haven't done is formation. And I
Right,
suppose
right,
in
right,
some
right.
respects,
Yeah. No,
I,
what I've been in the order, I don't know, 10 years or so. I'm a chaplain, and what I found is there's sort of like two Franciscans, like, the extroverts and the introverts. There's some people who seem to come to the order for the action part of it, and there's some people who come for the contemplation part of it. And of course, we're supposed to weave both of those threads together, right?
right,
Um, and I found it as a chaplain trying to get in contact and have conversations with the people who are more inward quite difficult. And it's as if they want to be a member of the order, but they sort of focus on the reclusive part, and they're quite alone. So the whole thing of an order is that you're part of a giant family. And
right,
how could you encourage these people? What could you say to them to encourage them to sort of have a, sort of, stick their neck out a bit, or you really get involved, and how that could help them, how they would enjoy it, like not a burden, right? How
right.
could you?
Well, I think that has to be approached in the formation process.
Right.
And there's nothing wrong with being contemplative. Bishop Desmond Tutu was a member of the Third Order in Africa many years ago, obviously.
Mm.
Um, and he found, well, he certainly was a man of action, but he felt in his later years that he needed to nourish his contemplative side. So he joined the order of Julian, St. Julian of Norwich. So we have that balance. But I think for us in Canada, in the US, it's important to approach that in the formation process
Hmm. Hmm.
to help people understand that there needs to be action as well as contemplation,
Right.
just like Richard Rohr says.
Yeah. Yeah, Action and Contemplation Center. And yeah, have you been to New Mexico to his place?
I have not,
No,
but I've
no.
read several of his books.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I know
And
it's.
there's one that's very apropos, I think, to Franciscans even, and that is Anglican Franciscans, Episcopalians.
Right.
That is his book, Falling Upward,
Oh, right. Yeah.
which talks about the two halves of life. And the second half of life, I think, is very applicable to what we aspire to.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, wonderful. So has
And
all of this, like you've been Minister Provincial, you've done all these things. How has this changed you? Because I always have this imagination that when we get to choose a path, we have that choice. But then when we made that choice, things are going to happen to us. We're going to be molded in a particular way because of people, events, responsibilities, etc. Right? So how have you been molded through your experiences with TSSF?
well, I think the rule, the guidelines, I like to call them, not the
Hmm.
rule, help us be more aware of what's going on in the world and in our immediate environment. And I think we're just keener, our ears are tuned, and our hearts are more open to what's going on in the world. I mean, I'm the same person as I was, but I think I um, feel more in tune with the world and its sometimes suffering, miseries.
Hmm. Are you right now, given what's going on, I meet quite a few people who are anxious and quite disturbed. And
Right,
I always have this, once again, theory that faith would mean, yeah, you recognize it, but our anxiety would be less. We would, trust in a loving God. How has your anxiety been recently, given what's going on? How have you been able to respond to that given your faith life?
right. Well, as you said, there is a certain amount of anxiety, but I don't dwell on it
Mm,
because I can't operate that way. I have to operate on a basis of hope
mm,
and trust in God that justice will be done. And
mm,
I'll do my part, however small it is.
mm, mm,
Well, I
mm,
don't like what's going on,
mm,
and I'm embarrassed for my country.
mm,
But, I have to carry on just like the rest of us, and we do our ministries and carry on
mm,
just as we should.
mm, mm. And what, and you're obviously you've done all these things. What is your right now at where you are in your life? Where is your contemplation, action, Franciscan focus right now?
Well, the contemplation part is part of the daily office,
Yeah.
saying prayers before or going to retreats if I can. I mean, there are even home retreats that the Franciscan sisters have published. I don't know if you're aware of
No,
those.
I did not know about that. This is
And if you contact Sister Pamela Clare, she has digital versions and booklets about retreats for Lent, Advent, and Pentecost. And for a donation, she'd be happy to send those to you.
now Sister Pamela Clare is, how do I find out? Is she
Well, if you look in the directory at the front,
right?
you'll find a listing for the community of St. Francis.
All right.
And
Okay.
she's a minister, minister,
Community of, I got it right here. St. Francis House in San Francisco.
exactly.
Okay, I got it right here. It's on page 4. For those of you listening, the
Mhm.
Community of St. Francis First Order Sisters is on page 4 of the directory.
Right.
Okay.
So as far as action goes, in addition to the two things I told you, the advocacy and the interpretation for Spanish speakers for medical purposes, I'm on several boards.
Right.
I was active, since I'm a deacon, I was elected to a board of deacons called the Association for Episcopal Deacons, which includes Canadian deacons.
Mhm.
And I was doing some of the financial part of that. I'm on a board of a cemetery in
Mhm.
Salt Lake City. It is the only not-for-profit board that was founded by an act of Congress of our government.
Oh,
150 years ago. So that's kind of special.
yeah,
And
yeah.
tomorrow I'm giving a presentation along with another board member to a PEO group. It's a charitable group. So I do that. And, if there are marches around, I'm willing and ready to go march.
Mhm.
We've done marches against gun
Do you think
control.
there's going to be one of the meetings I was chatting with some friends back more like in New York, uh, near New York, and they were talking about maybe a national strike or something like that. Do you have what would you think of that kind of an idea?
Well, I would assess it, and if something were happening in Salt Lake, I would do it.
Yeah,
It's kind of difficult to go out of town these days.
yeah, yeah.
Mm.
Well, it's a lot
But
from where you live. I've been there. It's a long way to go anywhere, right?
it's yeah,
Yeah.
very well said.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, it's lovely,
Uh,
but clearly your health is great. So just
it's,
looking at you right now, has once again, I'm wondering, do you think in some way you're maybe a bit of the spiritual peace that you have, is that you think that might have helped in some way or what? How have you
uh,
stayed healthy?
well, the disciplined life of a Franciscan, especially an Anglican or Episcopal Franciscan, anchors a person. I mean, it's a disciplined prayer life, and in many instances, it has helped me weather things that have come along, which
Yeah,
weren't very agreeable, but having the faith and the trust in God and saying prayers and being open with others have helped me immensely.
yeah, yeah. Are there other uh, tertiaries in the area?
No, but we do have companions of the Society of St. Francis. And there's one committed member. And then we have three other people who come monthly to meetings, and we read books and have discussions and
Oh,
a bit of meditation. Most of the companions meet by Zoom.
right,
So we're maybe one of four or five groups, circles they're called,
right,
who meet in person, and that's delightful. It's
right.
wonderful for me to be able to meet with other people who have a bent for St. Francis and St.
Yeah, that's
Clare.
great. So you get to meet once a month or so with people in the flesh.
Exactly.
That is wonderful. That is a really great gift. My wife has been wanting to become a companion. And
Oh, wonderful.
how do you find that? I mean, you interact with companions. How is it? In what way is it different? You find,
Well, they don't take vows for one thing.
right,
Okay, that's the major difference. But
right,
they do write a rule of life,
yeah,
and there's a process and not as onerous as it is to be a third order member.
yeah,
But, there are things to do, readings and expressing oneself in writing.
yeah.
And Bob Kirshner is the person to contact. If you look on page page 59 of the 2025 directory,
Yeah,
you'll find Bob's name, and he's the person.
Bob Kirshner. Yes, okay, I'm just looking.
Exactly,
Uh, Bob, I got it. Robert Kirshner in Florida. Yeah,
exactly,
I got him. K-E-R.
right,
Yeah. Okay, so he's the guy for the companions.
right. So I feel very happy that there are companions here. In former years, we would have a regional convocation taking in people from Idaho and Oregon and so forth. But the regional convocation idea has developed differently. And of course, COVID made us rethink everything.
Mhm.
So um, I'm sure there are new ways of doing things. I belong to a fellowship in California, and I have not met most of the people there. So we are on Zoom, we have programs. It's a wonderful group. It's varied. People live in many areas, not only California. So that feeds me
That's good. So you're being fed.
because
I
I'm
was going to ask about
initiated.
that. I mean, the whole one of the objective if you're joining a group of people is you get fed, right? You know,
Exactly.
it's a social experience like eating food. I mean, we went. You ever heard of a group called Bread and Puppet? A puppet group out of Vermont. So it was a puppet group that was always did plays that were sort of socio-political commentary. Fun, but always they always had edge, and they had this. They called it Bread and Puppet because they had this idea that just like we need to feed our physical bodies with food, we need to feed our souls with art. So their way, not the spirit, like sort of made a difference between soul and spirit, but art,
Yes,
something non-material, something just something beautiful or something, that's art, right? And
exactly.
that,
I like that very much. Brother John Bankert, he was a friar, used to do puppet shows, Franciscan puppet events, and he wonderful. So
wow,
that was a form of art.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, great, great. Well, we're approaching the end of our time. I don't want to panic at the end. Sometimes Zoom just chops me off, and I'm like, oh no. And eh, is there anything else you'd like to sort of, share with our fellow tertiaries out there in particular for the, you know, for the sake of, just sharing with them?
Well, there are two things. I was instrumental along with David Catron in starting the formation groups in Brazil several years ago. So that was very engaging and very fulfilling. I mean, the model changed for the better, but we were in on the ground floor. So I'm happy about that. The other thing that is interesting to me as I reflect on it, you know how people are professed in their fellowships or maybe at a convocation,
Yeah.
right? Well, I was professed in a little garden in Rome
Oh,
because, as I said, I was a representative to the one of the congresses of the Franciscans, worldwide Franciscans, and the people who were at my profession ceremony and who conducted it were the people I mentioned before: John Scott, former guardian; Dee Dobson, current guardian at the time; and Richard Scott. It was just the most intimate and the most beautiful ceremony that I could ever have wished for. Very
yeah. So
great.
you've been blessed, and I think you've been blessing others in turn. I think that's our task. We want the blessings of God, of course, but to pass it along, to pass that blessing along. It sure seems that you've been doing that
Well,
and continue to do that.
I hope I'm doing the will of God.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. Wonderful. I would like a great big favor from you. I know I'm asking a lot, but if you could leave us with a prayer, I would really appreciate it.
Okay. Gracious and loving God, we thank you for this opportunity to be together, even though we're on a screen, a monitor. It is a way of bringing us together, and I honor you and am grateful for the opportunities that I have had in life. And I wish for all Franciscans that they be blessed by God. Amen.
Amen. I'm going to turn the recording off now and we can chat for a bit. Anyway, who's ever listening, I hope you've enjoyed this chat with Anita in Salt Lake City. And if you're ever in Salt Lake City, drop on
Please
by. I'm sure she'd love to have a visit.
love it.